So a lot of you have asked for chicken and dumplings and a video on how to make those. And I've been a little hesitant to do it just because this is one of those recipes that, unlike my others, it is not easy. It is not really all that fun to make like some of the other stuff. There's a few steps, things you have to do that are a little bit harder than normal, but it's very rewarding. And I have come down with a cold, and there's nothing that's going to make me feel better like chicken and dumplings. So the only reason I got out of bed today is because I knew there was chicken and dumplings at the end. So I'm going to do your recipe for you today and try and make it through it. But yeah, I have pajama bottoms on if it makes you feel any better. So ask questions if you have questions, because this is one of those that's just kind of, I'm trying to measure everything for you and not do any guesswork. The recipe I got from my Aunt Betty has specific measurements on it, but you know, you may tweak things here or there. If you have company, you can double this recipe. Anything that's left over, it's good rewarmed, it's really good heated up again. Or you can put it in the freezer, but just not for a long period of time because of the dough. It's not gonna, it will freeze well, but it's not gonna last super long in the freezer. So to get started, this is gonna be a lot like the biscuit recipe that I had in one of my other videos. So if you want to review that to kind of see some of why this is done the way it's done or how it's done, then you can do that. But I do have, I had a whole chicken. I cooked it in the crock pot for 6 to 8 hours. So you take the chicken, rinse it off, make sure there's a bag inside the chicken usually that has the organs in it, or the organs may be in there that you will need to take out. And some manufacturers leave it in there, some of them don't, some of them put it in a separate bag that you can remove. It just depends on what you buy. I think the one that I use is a Purdue brand chicken that I get at the grocery store. So it does have a bag that you can just pull out. I rinse that chicken, put it in the crock pot, cover it with water, plus in my crock pot I completely cover as far as I can fill up the crock pot, just because I need all that broth. Store-bought broth does not work for this recipe. It's a little too condensed and too overpowering, and it's not going to give you the same flavor. So this is one recipe you cannot take shortcuts on, even though I'm a huge fan of shortcuts where you can take them. So with this one, it's just, you might as well go to a restaurant and get chicken and dumplings if you're going to take the shortcuts, because it's going to be about what they serve there versus the difference of having homemade. So I cooked that chicken for 6 to 8 hours. I took the chicken out, and you kind of have to take it out in pieces just because it does completely fall apart because it's so tender. So I take it out, put it on a plate to cool, and then remove all the undesirable stuff, the skin, the fat, the bones, the gristle, any part that you don't want to have in your chicken and dumplings you're going to throw away. You do need that dark meat in there for the flavor, and you do need that broth that you cooked it in. So don't just pour the broth off like I've done in the past and then didn't have broth. So back here in this pot I have 8 cups of broth that I have saved from when I cooked my chicken. And then I completely debone that chicken, and I've got all that set aside to put in later. But to make the dumplings, that's what we're going to do right now. I have 2 cups of plain all-purpose flour, unlike the biscuits that we made where we use self-rising. So this is plain all-purpose flour, and I'm going to take a ½ cup of Crisco and put in there, or a ½ cup of lard, whichever you want to use is fine. And then we're going to cut that into the flour just like you do for biscuit dough. So if you're unsure about why you do that or how you do that, then watch that video. It'll give you a little bit more information on how to do that. And this is called a pastry blender. So it's just all these separate, it's almost like pieces of wire that are wrapped into a handle. And you just kind of mash it into the vegetable shortening. And it's gonna cut it into tiny, tiny little pieces by the time you're done that'll be mixed with your flour. So your flour will go from a super fine, powdery consistency to more of a meal type consistency. It won't be quite as meal-like as cornmeal is, but it will be a little bit different texture. And you do want to make sure that you don't have any clumps of vegetable shortening once you're done. You don't want any big pieces. You want it to all be incorporated and cut in really fine. And the difference with this is with the biscuits, you can make those and roll those out in your hand. With this, you have to roll it out with a rolling pin. So it will be a little bit different. And once I get to that part, I'll turn the camera down so you can kind of see what I'm doing. If you don't have a pastry mat to roll your flour out on, one thing that I do, or if I'm doubling the recipe especially because it's just too much for the mat, it would take up 2 or 3 mats probably. I will take wax paper, a few sheets of wax paper, and tape it to my countertop and just kind of use that to completely cover my countertop so that whenever I'm done rolling out the dumplings, then I can just pull that up and throw it in the trash and not have as much of a cleanup. Okay, so I'm all done with that. Now, one difference between this and biscuits is that we're going to add 2 eggs that I've beaten. Two eggs and a 4th cup of milk. Mix that all together. It's going to give it a little bit of a more of a yellow color. And you just want to get it to where it's all, you shouldn't have to add any more liquid unless you use a different brand of flour. And I talked about that in the biscuit video too. This is white lily flour, and it's what I use because I know it's going to turn out the exact same every time. Maybe I should send them a bill for promoting their product so much. Nah. Okay, so I've got it all mixed up, and I'm going to get a little bit of flour on my hand just to get it off the fork. Now, you do want to coat your surface with flour before you start because that's going to keep the dough from sticking to the cutting mat. So let me run around and turn the camera down since I can't reach it from where I'm at, and you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So I'll be right back with you. So now we're going to put flour on this surface, and I had a little bit of flour spill out of the bowl, so there's a few little specks on here. So we're going to put the dough here in the center, and then we're going to roll it out into a large rectangle type shape. So since it's all going to start here and be concentrated here, that's really where we need our flour to be. So I'll dump it here. We'll get a little bit more flour on my hands just to pat this out. I want to get it started in the general shape that I want it so that hopefully it won't end up rolling off of my mat. And I'm going to add more flour to my mat because this will stick to to your wax paper or to your mat. Really bad if you don't get enough flour. I'm telling y'all, this is messy to make. Okay, I do need to turn on the stove. And I want that chicken broth to start boiling. You need a rolling pin. You could do this by hand, but I think it's better to use a rolling pin. And I'm just going to start rolling it into the shape I want it. We have people showing up to pick up bees today. So the driveway alarm's going off constantly. The dogs are whining because they know people are here. And they know I have chicken. And they get boiled chicken scraps when I'm done. And I may have to turn that off. Okay, so I would say I probably have it rolled until it's probably about 1/4 of an inch thick. You definitely don't want it any thicker than that. And then I take a pizza cutter and I just roll and cut it that way. That is going to be the best way to do it. I don't like my dumplings to be large, so I will cut them a little bit smaller. These I did get too wide, and it's okay if you, hey, I'm on cold medicine, y'all, so that's why these lines are not straight. When your dumplings are cooked, nobody's gonna know anyway. Some of these are like 1.5 inches wide. Really, I don't want to cut them any wider than 1 inch. And then I'm going to go back through. I'll just cut them shorter this way. And we want that broth to be boiling whenever we drop the dumplings into it. So the way this works is you get the broth to a boil, like a rolling boil. And then you start dropping the dumplings into it. And this is so much easier if you have another person who can help you, who can stir, whoops, those are way too big, who can stir that broth while you're dropping the dumplings in. Because that does make a huge difference. It keeps because they tend to float. And then the more you get in there, the harder it is to get them down into the broth so that they can start to cook. So as soon as this broth starts to boil, I'm going to drop the dumplings in there just one at a time. I'll just stack them up in my hand and take a bunch over there and drop them in one by one. And then I just keep stirring in between about every handful. I'll give it a stir. Get them all in there, then set your timer and cook it. Cook the dumplings for 10 minutes. At that point, and you can turn it down so it doesn't boil over. They just need to be in that hot water, at least a semi-boil, cooking for 10 minutes. Then we'll come back and add one other ingredient before we simmer it. And then I'll show you what to do. One thing I did forget to mention is that once you have the dumplings dropped into the broth, with them boiling, you do want to add a 1/2 teaspoon to a whole teaspoon of salt. And I add a whole teaspoon just because it just soaks up the salt, and you may still have to salt it some at the end. But if you're unsure, go ahead and at least put 1/2 teaspoon of salt in there, and then you can adjust it once it's done if you need to. But it's kind of hard to get them salty, and if you get it too salty, you can always just throw a potato in there, soak up some of that salt, and make it to where it's not quite as salty. So I'm going to let these boil for 10 minutes, and then we'll be right back and add another ingredient, and then we'll cook them a little longer and then put the chicken in there at the very end. So I'll let this cook for a little bit and then I'll be right back with you. Okay, so now the dumplings have cooked for 10 minutes. They've been boiling, so they're pretty well done. And now I just need to add 1 cup of milk. So I'm going to pour that in and then stir it. And then I'll put the top on here, put this on low, and let it simmer for about 25 minutes. And I'm going to turn the stove back on. I had it turned off. I'm going to let it simmer covered for 25 minutes, and then I'll put the chicken in and cook for another 5 minutes. And then it'll be done. So the prep time is what takes the longest. And it really, just doing the extra steps, multiple steps. It does take a really long time to prepare this, so don't think this is something you're going to be able to throw together in an hour, because more than likely it will take you more time until you become accustomed to cooking it. So anyway, I'm going to put these in here, let them simmer. You want to stir them often because they will stick. So turn it on the lowest setting that you can get on your stove, and then keep coming and stirring it to keep them from sticking to the bottom of the pan. And we'll be right back as soon as it's time to put the chicken in. Okay, so we've let this simmer for 25 minutes with the milk in it. And what I didn't tell you is you can use whole milk. The recipe does call for whole milk. I use 2% just because that's what I normally have here. I rarely have whole milk. And it works just fine. Skim milk would probably be okay, but I don't think it's going to give you enough of the creaminess that you're going to want. And here I have a bowl of chicken. That's the chicken that I cooked in the crock pot that I took off the bone and removed the skin and the fat. And I'm going to put that in here, and then let's see if I can do this with one hand. I don't think I can. Nope, I'm not going to be able to do it with one hand. Not to dump it like that, so I'll just grab it, drop it in. And that's probably going to give you close to 4 cups of chicken. If you can put it in earlier if you like, but I can tell you that it will cook your chicken all to pieces. The chicken is already cooked just to shreds, and to cook it more than you need to is just gonna, it's just basically gonna dissolve into here, which I like it that way, because I would be fine with just the chicken and, I mean, just the dumplings and no chicken. But that's just my preference. So it's up to you which you like best. But I put it in at the very end. That way it's just not cooked to death. So, and I've gotten chicken and flour all over my stove that I haven't wiped up yet. So just totally ignore that. So anyway, this is it. I'm going to stir it and I'm going to let it simmer for another 5 to 10 minutes, and then it'll be ready to go. So here we have a bowl of the finished chicken and dumplings, and those dumplings just look amazing. That's the best part. It's not like the restaurant dumplings where they're like really thick and just taste like dough. These are thin and they're cooked. Just real, I don't know if you can see how thin that is, but they are really thin, and chunks of chicken, by putting it in at the end, they do kind of hold together a little bit better. And I hope you try it. Please ask if you have any questions about this, and let me know how you like it. You will never want restaurant chicken and dumplings again once you try this, but don't take the shortcuts. So let me know how you like it. Thanks.